Alright, buckle up, shuckles, and get ready to see if the Bundy curse applies to the one time that Married with Children decided to sort of vaguely do a trans episode by proxy. That's right, it's season 9's episode 10, Dud Bowl, a big ol' focus on sports and the desperate desire of old men to recapture their youth through sporting accomplishments. And yeah, those are klaxons going off in case you were wondering, because we have a trans woman appearing in a sports-centric episode. A generally bad sign for anything positive for the community, and not to further dampen the mood and spirits here, but Married with Children was not exactly the most progressive or well-written or positive sitcom to ever get put onto Fox.
More illegal immigrants, some of whom speak English.
It in fact kind of being quite similar to all the other shows with transphobia that we've already covered from that network. To bring you up to speed quickly and introduce you to the idea of what we're talking about today, it's a family-based show filled with all the drama that comes from having a bunch of related characters interact with one another over the course of a decade. With Al Bundy as the misanthropic, depressed, and constantly berated father figure, whose happiest things in life are a nudie bar and an old car. Peggy Bundy, the nagging, lazy mother figure who really defines the idea of the ball and chain that so much old media liked to cling to when it came to showcasing families that just seem to really hate each other deep down. Kelly Bundy, the stupid, blonde, sexually active daughter, and Budrick Bundy, the basically just a stereotype of a teenage boy, with all the baggage that goes along with that.
Everywhere you look, temptation.
Yep, it's the show that really saw the statement, stereotypes are the laziest form of writing, and realised that what that meant was that you didn't have to do much work at all if all you did was just employ them.
I want a balloon!
You've already got one.
And that's what audiences lapped up and loved for 10 whole years. Yeah, that's about the baseline quality of writing we have to go off for the trans writing as well here, so the bar is very, 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 very low at this point. Let's see what it managed to do with it then, eh? Okay, before we can actually get into it, it is time for another classic, slightly related monologue, but I do love this old style of TV show where they have the credits at the beginning, showing all the people doing a thing with their name layered over them. It just has a real vibe to it that I think epitomizes sitcoms as this experience that you don't really need to be invested in to be able to watch. They literally give you all the names and a quick short visual confirmation of their vibe before you get into the show itself. And so that means that you, random person watching this in a hotel room at 3 AM, are able to click with it as quickly as someone who has tuned into this every week with their family.
That one just fell on the floor.
Married with Children, Sunday on Fox.
And I know that with the rise of streaming services, that kind of thing has sort of died out a little bit. People are more often choosing what they're going to watch rather than merely just getting whatever is served to them. But that whole nature of getting it served to you actually does have an influence on the trans conversation here. Because a lot of people would have seen this show, and a lot of people would have been influenced by how it handled trans people, because this was what was on the TV at the time. So if Married with Children employs a bunch of negative trans stereotypes that align with the casual demeaning and mocking of our community that was so prevalent around this point in time, then a lot of people are going to have that just subconsciously sink into their version of us and form the monolithic representation of trans identity that cis audience will then apply to real trans people.
Always bragging about her he-she cousin.
I was just taking Stanlerina to get her hormone shot.
I know we're sort of doing the analysis here before the actual commentary of the episode at this point, but that's just the kind of sweet deal you get on this channel. We do the conclusion at the beginning. Regardless, the episode begins with setting us up for the premise, as Al is at a bar with a bunch of other sports-dressed individuals for what appears to be a drunken funeral where they rob the corpse of Skippy to pay for the drinks.
Who's paying for this?
I mean, this whole thing is just used to really cement the manly man version of masculinity that guys built up for themselves over decades. Namely, that they don't care for any of that grievance stuff because they want to get to watching the game and the strippers in the cages. The question does sort of arise here in that, is anything that's actually happened on the screen so far funny?
And he was pound for pound he's the fattest guy I knew.
I mean, it's a hyper-exaggerated idea of gender norms at the time, so I suppose in that way it's meant to be humorous, but God, you really do realise how much writers fall back on those jokes as just a simple and easy way to avoid having to actually write proper setups and executions. Trust me, I know all about how to avoid doing as much hard work and writing as physically possible. I've got like a decade of university and YouTube essays under my belt at this point, and that's the definition of avoiding hard work. The sports talk and sports stuff continues, because being a sports guy decades ago is all that Al really has left in his life, and then some dude turns up from Al's sporting past with his own squad of old sports gentlemen who are stuck in the past about their physical exploits.
I said undefeated.
You wouldn't have been if you'd played us that year.
We get the real setup for the episode now, as both of these teams consider themselves the undefeated champions back in the high school days due to the game between them being cancelled. And now they're going to play another game with, I guess, a bunch of ancient people to prove who would have been the winner. Something that I'm sure is going to totally go well and not lead to a heart attack on both sides of the aisle. The episode then becomes a case of Al going around trying to convince all his old teammates to rejoin the squad for one last game. Something which actually doesn't happen, they all just agree to come and help him, but it does sort of remind me of Lady Ballers, that Daily Wire movie about, well, it was meant to be about trans people in sport, or at the very least it was going to be about them pretending to be trans to get into women's sports, but then the people at Daily Wire discovered that in real life, that was actually quite hard, so they instead decided to make up a fantasy world wherein that could really happen so they could mock trans people. Not something great to be reminded of from Married with Children here, but I do wonder if the people who wrote that movie saw this episode and had inspirations from it towards the narrative they went with. Because both have this same kind of old people from your team vibe joining together for a last Hail Mary to reclaim some kind of glory.
How are you going to convince anybody else to play?
Yeah, that's true, Daddy. What if the other teammates have lives?
Also, another tiny tangent for you here about the gender norm stereotypes of this time period. Jesus Christ, it is actually kind of sad how this show portrays the family as just hating each other. Like, it really is an epitome of that sort of stuck together vibe that a lot of people ended up really internalizing into their real relationship. When, let's face it, if you don't like the person you're with and consider them a burden, leave.
Aren't you forgetting something?
Well, I'm trying to, son, but she's sitting right there.
Don't be in that relationship anymore, because you're only hurting yourself and them and any kids you might have. A bunch of more depressing stuff happens in this scene. A bunch of Al hyping himself and his old man squad up to the cheers of the audience. Cheers that I find somewhat misplaced because this whole thing just screams sad to me. It's actually kind of like that Kevin Can Fuck Himself show, wherein it poked holes in the sitcom world by showing us both the classic sitcom vibe, like Married with Children, interlaced with a much more somber, lighted, and single-camera drama version of the same events. Like, if you just changed the tone of the set here, adjusted the cameras, and removed the studio audience, this could really be a dire scene of a desperate old man trying to find that last bit of glory in his life by seeking a decades-lost youth spent in sports. It's all about perspective, you know?
These guys all look up to me.
Not really.
We also get our first hinting towards the trans character of the piece, the mention of Fad from California, who was their quarterback and is flying in. Then we get much heavier hintings as the doorbell rings and Al talks a bunch about how he hopes that Fad is still in shape, and has that throwing arm, consoling himself with the fact that Fad never changes, so all should be safe, before opening the door to a very large and thick-set woman. And that's our cue to start taking notes, because this is when things can start going downhill really fast, or maintain a healthy course of introduction for a trans person. Based off what we've seen so far with Married with Children, the former seems like the most likely, and the latter feels like a pipe dream, but I'm always optimistic with these old shows. Perhaps more than I should be.
Dad's the kind of guy who never changes.
Now, before the scene cuts to black on the surprise reveal of Fad being a woman, I want to talk about three things. The first is that the audience reaction to this character walking onto the set is cheers and clapping, which I actually find kinda surprising and somewhat welcoming, though that might be because Fad is played by Drew Pillsbury, a guy known for... Okay, I'll be honest, it definitely isn't because of Drew Pillsbury. That isn't a famous actor at all. Like, who in the audience knows David Kimball from The Young and the Restless, or remembers him from that one episode of Baywatch he did, or that one episode of Days of Our Lives he did? So the cheers and clapping are for whatever the hell is going on here. The hell is going on here leading to our next point, which is that yes, they do have a cis man playing a trans woman. Something which I'm sure a lot of people are going to point out as being the norm around these decades, but personally, while I get that argument, it doesn't actually have any bearing on the fact that having a cis man play a trans woman goes a long way towards reinforcing the notion for a lot of cis audiences that a trans woman is secretly really just a man beneath the dresses and the makeup. And we don't even have the justification that a lot of later shows and movies used, where they had a cis man play an early in transition trans woman. Because, especially here in Married with Children, Fad is supposedly very late in transition, based on some information we get from later scenes. It's just part of a classically mean way of presenting trans women, specifically that seeks to make a joke out of our lives by having it be a costume that a guy puts on to get laughs.
Hi, Al, it's me, Thad.
What they should and could have done is to have found a trans actor and get them to be in the role. Though, based off the next point I'm going to bring up, I think it's very likely that the people involved in this show have never actually met or consulted or even engaged with trans identity distantly, except for just having heard stereotypical portrayals from other shows that they are now reiterating too. Because we learn that Fad is still going by Fad despite the gender transition.
Thad, you look like a freaking woman.
That's not believable at all as a revelation, and not just because most trans people change their names when they transition to move away from a designation that reminds them of the gender identity that they had forced upon them and no real say in, but mostly because no trans woman is going to go around being called Fad. I don't want cis audiences learning the lesson that a trans woman would choose to keep being called Fad, because that's crazy talk. And it further reiterates that whole idea of us as a joke and as something fantastical in our abnormality, all of which goes a long way to isolating the trans community and making us into outsiders from society. If you're a trans femme person who is named Fad, that's perfectly fine, and I'm actually in no position to judge you because I picked the apparently most bland and boring fucking trans name of all time that I share with about half the trans population. We all like lilies, I guess. The next scene continues where this one left off, with Al in shock about what has happened and Fad awkwardly making small talk to try and fill the void of conversation.
Al, you look just great.
Though the small talk does also make it seem as if Fad is judging Al for how he looks, seeing as Al kind of let himself go quite a bit. Something which is actually kind of funny when you consider the situation, right? Like, here is a reversal of what we would normally expect in this moment, with the trans woman being judging of the body of the cis person that she used to know. While Al freaks out about Thad being a woman now, and all the other guys in the back are shocked and horrified, Peggy comes in to save the day by being a goddamn fucking ally, complimenting Thad on her dress and having a little nice girls moment between the two of them over shared interests.
Oh, darling.
Hell yeah, Peggy. You fucking show the audience how to treat a trans woman right. And actually, part of these reactions does make me wonder if this has become an expected way for genders to react to trans people. Because aside from a few glaring celebrity outliers that I'm sure we can all think of, I and many trans women that I know have only experienced support, help, and acceptance from cis women about our identity, while men have generally been quite hesitant or unsure around it, if not downright hostile and aggressive. What I'm thinking here is that maybe shows like Married with Children and how it presented these reactions might have, alongside other reactions down the line, influenced and formed a subconscious expectation for similar reactions from real people who align with those characters when they run into real members of the trans community. I mean, we know for a fact that TV shows and movies do play a large and mostly unnoticed subtle part with regards to informing the automatic and gut reactions that identities feel towards those who are different than them, and so it's far from unreasonable to suggest that the way shows have presented men and women interacting with trans people differently could have played a part in how we face different levels of acceptance from those groups.
Dad.
Peggy! I get it! That's a gag!
It's certainly something worth thinking about with regards to how much power media has in affecting the lives of others decades down the line. Like, we are still, to this day, dealing with the ramifications of how those different genders perceive trans people, something which you can see in almost all studies that come out around it in recent years. Al comes out of shock and immediately moves to denial, seeing this whole trans thing as merely just a joke that Thad is playing on them, a prank that they're part of and that will be lifted to reveal that nothing has actually changed that drastically. And so Al doesn't have to do any mental lifting with regards to aligning one of his old friends with a group of people that I would bet any amount of money this character has never thought of before this point.
Ah, you always were a joker. Ah, that's a good one, Thad. The ball's in my court.
Unfortunately, denial oftentimes comes before anger, so I'm really worried about where this scene is going to go next. And where it goes is Al deciding to lift up Thad's dress so that the entire room of men can see her genitalia. That genitalia being presumably a vagina based on the immediate horrified reactions of all the guys. Jesus Christ, I don't know how to say this well, but that's sexual assault. He just sexually assaulted a trans woman to the laughs of the audience and the complete unreaction of the trans woman in question, because this is all part of a larger theme with trans bodies wherein we don't get control over them, where who we are is truly left to the scrutiny of the cis man, who is given the right to grab and reveal and assault us in the interest of proving who we are, a la Ace Ventura, if you remember that scene, which I'm not allowed to show because YouTube will ban this video if I do, so just remember it.
Big ol' Mr. Kanish!
It's kind of a your body, my choice situation, and that's never a good thing to be related to. That guys are freaking out at the revelation that Thad had a penis removed. Thad kinda laughs off the sexual assault and quickly says that basic line of trans representation that every show vaguely knows well enough to write in, while Al leans into the presentation of transness as being just a case of a guy getting bored with their gender, much like guys getting bored with their cars, something which is very casually demeaning to our struggles and lives.
We all get tired of our cars too. We don't rip the doors off.
Right on cue, as the team realizes they don't have a quarterback anymore, apparently, the evil other team turns up to do some gloating at them. gloating which turns into a mockery of Peggy as the main evil guy presumes that she is the trans woman. Though yet again, huge props to Peggy here as she just kinda looks happy that someone is complimenting her and doesn't take any issue with being confused with the trans woman. We stan Peggy in this household. She is a legend who keeps constantly finding herself on the right side of history with regard to trans people. You are welcome at Pride, lady. Just leave the guy at home. I'm worried he might sexually assault some more queer people. Thad, when mocked by the evil bad guy, then proceeds to punch him in the face as proof of how she still has her throwing arm, which I'm fully in support of because that guy is a douche and deserves to get punched.
I'm Thad.
I'm Thor.
You make the call.
Now, the show kind of avoids the conversation about trans sports that is all the rage right now by not having any of this be women's sports, but it also subtly goes towards supporting a side in that conversation by showing what we are led to presume being a trans woman well into her transition, with hormones and surgery, though based yet again on everyone's reaction to things, I'm actually pretty sure that the writers of the show have no idea what HRT is and just assume that being trans means going on an operating table and then you come out with breasts and a vagina and long hair and shaved legs. Another recurring theme in a lot of these trans episodes that I find incredibly distasteful due to the fact that it trivializes our real transitions and also informs incorrect views upon the community within the cis audience. Incorrect views that they might well carry around for the rest of their lives with no real challenge to it. But back to the sport thing, this Married with Children episode shows a trans woman performing with men and being on the same level as men in a very physical sport, well into her transition. And so by doing that, it effectively encourages the view on trans women as being basically just the same as a man that has influenced many of the recent attacks on trans athletes, when the reality is that years of hormone therapy and reducing testosterone to levels lower than that of a cis woman does absolutely have a massive effect on your sports performance. Yet again, it's more of the generalized and casually thrown in perceptions of trans women that go a long way to explaining how we have ended up where we have, with cis people internalizing a bunch of wildly untrue views of our community.
Damn, I left my purse in the car.
It's because shows like this just reiterated the same tired stereotypes over and over till they became a perceived reality, and one that we have had to fight against to disprove for the past decade and a half. Thanks, sitcom writers, for being lazy and not bothering to actually engage with trans people when we really didn't need that added difficulty. You could have just done a little bit of research or a bit of work. The game preparations are beginning, and we have another woman who turns up, one of the friends of Peggy that Al hates, and she is also fully supportive of Thad.
I am here in support of my sister-in-arms, Thad. I hope that she wins.
Saying how she is here for her sister-in-arms and to see them win. The guys really suck in this episode, but the women? The women are doing alright when it comes to being on Thad's side. We get a few more what I would hesitantly call jokes about the characters before we get into the game itself. Al gets his ass kicked a bunch before we start to realise that the enemy team brought a bunch of proper Super Bowl players so they could cheat to victory. Something that it takes a long time and the wives of the Super Bowl pro players turning up to ream out to their husbands for Al to finally also get.
Papa!
Oh no.
This whole thing just does seem like the writers had a way to get a bunch of pro football players and their wives on the show, presumably because Married with Children is watched by a similar audience to those who enjoy that sport, a sport that I don't actually know anything about, unfortunately, so the name drops they're doing here are basically meaningless to me. I'm more of a baseball pro wrestling fan myself, my favourite team being the Buccos, Pittsburgh Pirates, and of course for WWE I'm a huge Damian Priest Rhea Ripley fan, the Terror Twins, because I mean, come on, they're amazing in the ring. Though I gotta recognize Cody Rhodes for having quite some charisma and one hell of a theme song. Sorry, just dropping my credentials so all of you know that I'm not just about nerd shit like magic and gaming. Also, because we just skipped like 10 minutes of the Married with Children Dud Bowl episode due to it not having anything trans related or interesting to talk about. So yeah, I'm doing a little bit of filler time here. There is one little comment here for trans people, where it now mentions the fact that if he fails to score with the new non-cheating teams, he will dance nude in the sports bar in front of everyone, except for Fad and his own wife. Because I guess he views dancing naked in front of those women as being not something he wants to do. A very light point from Al here, which does sort of indicate that he at least views Fad as not 100% a guy, because he doesn't mention being unokay dancing in front of the other guys on his team. So logistically, this is maybe fine.
I will dance totally nude at the sports bar in front of everybody, said Fad.
And Fad gets another little dig in about how the women not getting to see Al naked is a win for her and Peggy, which I like because it's her getting in on the same mockery that all women get to do to Al. It's like a form of inclusion for the show. The episode ends with all the people at the sports bar drinking and celebrating, with Al in a dressing gown slowly stripping, but more importantly to us, one of the dudes buying a drink for Fad and then receiving a finger lips kiss from her to the cheers of the audience. To the cheers of the audience. Huh. And that's where it ends. Now, this has actually kind of gotten a little complex, hasn't it? I mean, the basic stuff we can say and have already kind of gone over a bit is the fact that the women in this episode are very respectful of Fad, are very much welcoming of Fad into womanhood and giving her a treatment that I would want to see replicated by everyone, and that the guys' reactions are generally pretty bad and inform a classical transphobic stance on seeing trans women as something shocking and also kind of aligning us with still being a man, including of course some light-hearted sexual assault, a term that you should never have to use, and yet here we are. However, I would say that the episode, despite its overwhelming falling back on fake and negative representations of our community, is still attempting to be accepting and positive of Fad as a character. Fad doesn't receive much verbal abuse. They don't deal with a lot of aggression from people for their identity. And they also get a sort of happy ending of a dude who clearly knows who Fad is and is not being tricked, still being happy to be with them. Everything that is wrong with this episode is wrong with the character and how the writers wrote her and wrote things around her is still present. But the trajectory at the very least is one that is trying to be kind and just failing a little bit to do so thanks to a lack of information or effort on the writer's part. Not great, but far from the worst thing that I've ever seen. Married with Children is just a product of its time at the end of the day, and the transphobia it employs falls into that oh so familiar background level of transphobia that was just employed by so many different mediums and places to the degree that it became the expected way that we got put onto screens. It's a good way of seeing how that kind of thing can be damaging to a show that is not necessarily trying to be transphobic or trying to be aggressive towards trans people, but incidentally feeds a perception that is negative.
Like a freaking woman!
And that's that. If you liked what I did in this video, then that's great. It's exactly what I'm here for on YouTube, weirdly enough. I'm not one of those channels trying to make videos that people hate. And if you want to support the channel, then the best way to do that is by going to either my Patreon and subscribing, or Ko-Fi if you only want to do a one-off payment. Both of which are in the description below, and are great for keeping this channel running by paying all the bills that I have. Internet, power, rent, food, and cat. And also right now, a pretty sizable computer bill because my computer is having major issues requiring me to go back to my backup stuff. Those in the $5 and up category on the screen right now. and I really do appreciate everyone on there for helping to keep this channel running. Now, while those names are on the screen scrolling, I want to do something a little different here today and talk about magic cards for a second. See, I'm big into the Magic the Gathering hobby, and I haven't really known how to get onto any of those Commander shows that are all the rage on YouTube right now, except for, you know, talking about Magic, so here we are. Yes, I know, this is a little bit cringe and a fair bit wanky, but I never ended up releasing a 100k subscriber video, so I think I've earned a little bit of wankiness. So here's why I'd be a great fit for a Commander show like Commander at Home, or Shuffle Up and Play, or Game Nights. Firstly, I'm very trans, and it's got to be worth something, but more importantly, secondly, I have a bunch of very fun decks that I would love to get people to see. Stuff like my Multiverses Beyond deck, wherein every card is from a different franchise, all coming together to fight like it's Ready Player One or the Space Jam sequel. Or what about my Oops All Rats deck, a deck dedicated to having a bunch of the cutest little guys you've ever seen get big enough to swing and kill someone? Or what about my 2 Emrakuls and 30 Squirrels deck, a force powerful enough to take on the entire world now that they've stopped fighting and are working together? I've got tons of these things, and I could keep going, but I won't because you hopefully get the idea. Admittedly, I've just realised that I live in New Zealand, and so I don't have a great way of getting to the US for the recordings, so I suppose that actually makes this all very unlikely. Well, I guess we can just write this audition off as a great chance for all of you to see some of the sort of decks that I run, and we can just call it that, hey? We can forget the whole pretty embarrassing attempt to get into other YouTube shows thing, right? We can ignore that bit. We can pretend that didn't happen. Yeah, I'm never gonna live that one down, I think. Well, I got sad. Thanks again to the people on my Patreon who pay money to have this channel keep going. You lot really are the ones making things happen, because let's face it, the ad money from YouTube is unreliable and the sponsorships for some reason don't seem to be lining up for the content that I make. Thank you also to everyone who watched this video. You can go and check out some of my other videos that I have on a variety of media and genres to see more commentary on trans rep in those different places. With that said, have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Oh shit, I forgot to mention my Jolly Balloon Man deck. See, I actually went and have drawn a bunch of balloon cards for the deck of creatures that I intend to copy with Jolly Balloon Man. It's a really cool visual thing to have on the table and goes a long way to making the deck more fun to pilot. Okay, that's enough magic. I'm not getting on the shows anyway, so go on. Get out of here. Scram!